Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast from another impressive Timberwolves victory. Yes, that's 4 in a row. It's 4 opponents in a row held under 40% shooting by this apparently fantastic Timberwolves defense. We'll break that down. We'll talk about another great Ant game, a little bit of a resurgence as well for both Karl-Anthony Towns and Shake Milton. Plenty to get to on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's J-A-S-E medical.com. Happy Thursday, everybody, and it's a victory Thursday. This is the post-game podcast, a phenomenal Wolves performance again on Wednesday night. We're going to break down the entire game against the Pelicans, what was most impressive. We'll do some individual studs and duds. There's lots to get to today. A big thank you here off the top, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, along with all the other great Minnesota Locked On podcasts. And you can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. By Twitter, I mean X. You know what I mean. Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken, and that's 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right, let's get right into it. There's so much to get to. This was a pretty much an all-around impressive, dominant performance by this Timberwolves team. I don't really know how else to say it. Like, obviously, beating the Celtics was incredible, and the dominant win over the Jazz was great. I mean, the Nuggets win a week ago is the most impressive of the lot, I would say. But this performance, yes, against a shorthanded Pelicans team, I think we have to acknowledge that, right? But this was an all-around dominant performance. Yes, it was close after the first quarter, and the second half was actually the Pelicans, I think, won the second half because of garbage time. So, but you take the whole body of work, they were good on both ends of the floor in this game. It was actually a solid offensive performance. We've seen a couple games where it's been a mucky game because they've been so good defensively. The offense hasn't flowed. I thought the offense was great in this game. But I want to start with the bigger picture thing, which is, well, yes, we can acknowledge that the Pelicans were shorthanded and obviously missing, of course, Zion Williamson and CJ McCollum, but also other, several rotation pieces, Herb Jones, etc. That really matters. But this is exactly what this Wolves team needs to prove that they're able to do. Remember last year, they were beating good full-strength teams. Like, they played playoff teams above 500 last year and struggled at times against not at times, just really throughout the season, against bad teams and against teams missing key players. Good teams missing stars, bad teams missing their best players, whatever, you name it. The Wolves struggle with it. And obviously Chris Finch is painfully aware of that. And it seems like the players are pretty self-aware at this point too. And I'm going to throw up a Rudy Gobert quote here if you're watching on YouTube, what he said after the game about that subject. Rudy said, regardless of who we play, who's hurt, we know that our biggest opponent is ourselves. I'm really proud the way we came out. We came out regardless of who's on the court. It's still the NBA, and guys are talented. And yes, this can sound like coach speak, locker room speak, whatever. The only, what is it? We know our biggest opponent is ourselves, right? We can only beat ourselves. And then also, it's the NBA. Everybody's talented. You could say that, like, you could hear that in an NFL locker room, any, Sunday post game, or a lot of NBA locker rooms, but it means something to this Timberwolves team because they beat themselves so often last year. And you could argue early this season, I mean, like the Toronto game and the Atlanta game, not necessarily because those teams were shorthanded, but because those teams are teams the Wolves should have beaten, and they played well enough to win in certain phases of each of those games. Of course, the big lead against Atlanta And the Toronto game was just a very winnable game. It was just sloppy, right? We said that at the time. The Wolves can beat anybody at any given night. And we've seen them beat full strength good teams, right? Like, it's not just, Miami was missing Jimmy Butler and New Orleans missing Zion. And, they've played teams with guys missing. The Celtics were a bit shorthanded as well. But they've beaten a full strength Denver Nuggets team. They played the Nuggets well last year. They played other good teams well last year. So it's not a matter of like, hey, they're just beating shorthanded teams. That's exactly what they need to prove that they can do, that they can function in a vacuum themselves, regardless of opponent, especially on offense, but that they bring it defensively and related to that on the defensive glass on a nightly basis. And all three of those areas, just the general offensive flow, the overall defensive effort / defensive rebounding, those were issues last year against opponents like this. Shorthanded opponents, even when full strength, the Wolves would have been favored at home against the Pelicans, probably by a couple of points, 2.5 points or something like that at FanDuel, I would imagine. This ended up being, I think before the game, it was a 9.5 point. The Wolves were favored by 9.5 points because of all the injuries to the Pelicans. So a team they should have beaten regardless, but especially shorthanded. And the Wolves did exactly that. So like, as doom and gloom as I was, and many of us were, and I think it was warranted after the Atlanta game, this is flipping that narrative. And this is another step in the right direction. Coming into this homestand off of that Atlanta loss, I thought a split was probably realistic. I think that's what I said on the show. And I thought 3-1 would be a big win for the homestand. To come out of this homestand with 4 wins, Denver, I guess Miami was this homestand. Who was it? Denver, Utah, Boston, and New Orleans, to come out with a 4-0 homestand sweep ahead of a long, tough road trip. You can't ask for anything better. The vibes are so much better now than they were a couple of weeks ago, and rightfully so. I want to talk a little bit about Anthony Edwards because I thought he was still the best overall player in this game. I mean, we're saying that almost on a nightly basis now. And then I want to talk a little bigger picture about the team, and also some role guys, but also Karl-Anthony Towns had a solid game. But let's start with Ant because I don't want to bury the lead too much with how well he played. Anthony Edwards finished with a game-high 26 points. He also had 8 assists in this game and 3 rebounds. The shooting efficiency was not outstanding, 26 points on 22 shots. He was just 2 of 8 on threes, but we knew that there was going to be a performance or two coming where Ant came back to earth a little on 3-point attempts because he'd been shooting over 50% for the season. He did get to line 5 times, which was good to see. You'd like to see a couple more free throws in there based on the volume of field goals, but he was a distributor in this game. And we'll talk about Nickeil Alexander-Walker later. He also had 8 assists, believe it or not. Anthony Edwards had 8 assists in this game and only 3 turnovers for as much as he was handling the ball. And also, I give this caveat every time, but Ant's plus minus is such an outlier. I'm going to say it. I'm going to list it off here, even though I don't like individual game, single player plus minus. Ant was a plus 35 in 33 minutes in this game. Nobody else on the Timberwolves was greater than a plus 24. That's significant. And you like, there's so much noise in this particular stat, I guess, box score stat, right? Individual player plus minus in a single game. But when it's that stark of a difference, and the Wolves won by 21, but nobody else in the starting lineup was better than a plus 24. It was a plus 35 in this game. He was dominant on both ends of the floor. I think it was consecutive possessions or maybe 2 out of 3 possessions in the second half where, and I think it was both third quarter, where Ant just pickpocketed. One was Brandon Ingram. I forget who the other one was, leading to dunks in the open court. We had the windmill dunk at the end of the game. But the smothering defense that this team is playing, we'll talk more about that. But Ant specifically is such a major part of that. Like the national narrative around Ant is just catching up to how good he is defensively. On the ball last year, Ant was every bit this good. It's just like he's ratcheted it up another level. Like, hey, we are the league's best defense, and I want to make all defense. I want to be an all-NBA player. And it just, like, guys don't – we're seeing effort from him that I'm not here to, like, call out Brandon Ingram's effort. And I thought he was fine for New Orleans. He needed to be better than fine if they were going to have a chance in this game with how shorthanded they were. But Ant just taking it to Brandon Ingram is so refreshing to see a Timberwolves star just be like, nah, I'm not going to let this star beat me. I'm also a star. And that's something that Karl-Anthony Towns has done occasionally throughout his career, but not with the consistency that we've seen Anthony Edwards do it here recently. This was just a very strong all-around Anthony Edwards performance. Next, I want to talk about the team. I want to talk about the defense. I want to talk about Cat. We'll get to some role players here later. Shake, Mike Conley. A very solid all-around game for the Wolves, and we'll also talk individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On fantasy basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire every week, we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And one of his picks is Jordan Hawkins, which, Wolves fans, we just watched Jordan Hawkins take on the Timberwolves. Pelicans first-round pick, rookie this year. He should keep a starting role, according to Josh, while the Pelicans deal with a myriad of injuries. His shooting may fluctuate, but he has the appeal to be added in fantasy. And against the Wolves on Wednesday, he had 14 points. It was a bit of a volume line as he had 14 points on 11 shots, 2 of 5 outside the arc, 4 free throw attempts, though. So depending on the format you're in, Jordan Hawkins could be a really, really nice add right now on your waiver wire, again, for daily fantasy as well. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. We've all had a time where we've had to fix our car to keep it running, or maybe there's a really cool upgrade that you want for your car. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, everydayers will be back again on Friday. We'll preview this road trip, a difficult road trip. Doesn't get any easier for this Wolves team. We'll see if they can take their undefeated home record on the road, where they're 0-2 so far. We'll preview all that Friday. Of course, Friday night's game as well, but we'll take a peek ahead at the whole road trip on Friday's show. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the defense. I mentioned this in the open. This was the 4th consecutive game that the Wolves have held their opponent under 40% shooting. The 4th consecutive game. And guess what? They've won all 4 of those games. Every game in this homestand, they've held their opponent under 40% shooting. And this should have been the 5th game out of 7 where they held the opponent under 100 points. The Pelicans went crazy in garbage time and hit a couple of really tough shots. And for whatever reason, everything was a foul against the Wolves bench unit in the 4th quarter. Like, the Pelicans ended up attempting 22 free throws for this game, and they were 21 of 22 at the line. So a couple of misses in there, a couple of those ticky-tack foul calls that the Wolves were getting late as the refs were trying to, say, even things up a bit in the free throw category. And the Pelicans ended up over 100. But if you take out garbage time, this would have been the 5th time in 7 games that the Wolves held an opponent under 100. The only 2 other teams that got over 100, the Celtics, because they're the Celtics, and the Wolves, of course, won that game. And then that miserable Hawks game with the second half collapse and the 3 out of 4 quarters where the Hawks were like 60% shooting. Besides that, this has been an absolutely smothering defense. And every morning you wake up, you go to Basketball Reference or your favorite site. The Timberwolves are still number 1 in defensive rating. They have been for the majority of the season, or at least for the last week, ever since that Hawks game, right? Week and a half. They're still 1st in defensive rating. They're 1st in opponent points per game. They are utterly dominant. 1st in opponent effective field goal percentage, just 46.6% for opponents. They're still 4th in defensive rebound rate. We've seen that slide a little, but if you look at this on a game-by-game basis, they've out-rebounded or been equal with their opponent the last several games. They're also top 5 in free throw attempts per field goal attempts. And we talked about this on the show. I think it was just yesterday's show, previewing this matchup against the Pelicans on Wednesday's show. That's an important stat for a team that could not get out of their own way in terms of foul trouble the last couple of seasons. And it was one of my keys to the game in this one was stay out of foul trouble. And it's because we were in the wake of the Boston game with Towns fouling out. Towns fouled out again Wednesday, but it didn't matter because of the score. And he also played much better than Monday. But in the wake of Towns fouling out, the McDaniels foul trouble, just lots of foul trouble Monday, and also a Pelicans offense that, especially when shorthanded, was only really going to have a shot at putting up points if they got to the line. And the Wolves did a really good job, again, until the 4th quarter when it was effectively garbage time, of staying out of foul trouble in this game. and keeping the Pelicans off the line. But they're, again, number 1 in effective field goal percentage, number 4 in defensive rebound rate, number 5 in free throw attempts per field goal attempts, and number 1 overall in defensive rating. It's just been a really impressive defensive start to the season. We saw that in this game. The Wolves are so aggressive on the perimeter. And with Mike Conley fighting through screens, if Jaden McDaniels or Anthony Edwards get in ball screen action, they're doing the same. They're communicating defensively. They're trapping sometimes off the pick and roll. They're just getting their hands in passing lanes. You have Ant just pickpocketing other teams' stars on the perimeter. He did that a couple of times in this game. And then, of course, you've got Rudy Gobert shutting things down, kind of roaming the back line, playing this free safety role a lot of the time. It depends on the matchup. Occasionally, we're seeing him guard bigs, but for the most part, he's being allowed to do what he's best at. He had 2 blocks in this game, affected countless more shots. He also had 21 rebounds. Rudy Gobert had 17 and 21 in this game. I know I focused on Ant's line because he was so dominant, I thought, on both ends, and just kind of your attention is drawn to Ant, right? We all know that. Rudy Gobert had 17 and 21 in this game. Just an absurd line. And of course, I did say this on the post-game pod Tuesday following the Monday game over Boston. I talked about Rudy. What was he? 2 of 11 at the free throw line. I didn't want to focus on that at all because everybody has a bad shooting night and you're already a 65, 70% free throw shooter. So a bad night could look much worse. Well, sure enough, 9 of 12 in this game. So you combine those together. That's what, 11 of 23, still not great, but closer to where his average is, right? That bounced back in the proper direction. Not something to be overly concerned about. He's going to occasionally have a bad shooting night from the line. He turned in a fantastic performance. And if you wanted to argue for him as a player of the game over Ant, that'd be fine. Rudy Gobert was fantastic, shut things down in the lane. And of course, the Pelicans without Zion aren't going to do a ton of damage at the rim. Like Brandon Ingram, that's not really his speed, right? But they weren't going to get anything done at the rim because of the presence of Rudy Gobert. And we can't gloss over Jaden McDaniels. Like the offensive line was a little more pedestrian in this game for him, but he had some really good moments. McDaniels did have 0 rebounds in 26 minutes, which is something else we've focused on quite a bit. We can keep an eye on. But in this particular game, Rudy made up for all that with 21 boards of his own. Just another really strong Rudy Gobert performance. And I will say it again at every opportunity. This is the Rudy Gobert the Wolves traded for. This is the Rudy Gobert that Timberwolves fans saw dominate in Utah for several seasons. This is prime, like 2018-19 to 2022 Rudy Gobert. This is what we're seeing, and it's becoming more and more clear that last year he was so worn down, a bit injured after Eurobasket, not in the best start of season shape, and also in a new city with the new team. He's so much more comfortable now. He looks sleek, nimble, whatever adjective you want to use. That's Rudy Gobert right now. It's been very impressive. And between him and Jaden McDaniels and add in Anthony Edwards and Mike Conley, who's still a plus defender, this team is so good defensively. That's going to be their calling card. And I talked about this on Wednesday's show. This team's floor is so high because if their defense doesn't take a night off, and it really hasn't other than the Atlanta game. So what? They're 6 of 7 for the defense not taking a night off this year. The offense has been clunky at times. It was much, much, much better in this game. It's been clunky at times, but the ceiling for the offense is so high. There could be more variance, but if you battle every night defensively, you're going to have a chance to win every single night. And because you have an Anthony Edwards, especially him, but you could also say Karl-Anthony Towns, if your offense isn't flowing, you can at least be in the game because of your defense and then say, hey, Ant, try and get us a win. Like, just have a high volume scoring night. See if you can go full Kobe on these guys. Like that's a luxury. It's absolutely a luxury to have. One other point about the team. Actually, let's do the role player thing. Mike Conley was fantastic again. He's been so good lately. Again, if you didn't watch the game, like the line's not going to jump off the page. 12 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. But he was 4 of 5 shooting. All 5 of his field goal attempts were 3-pointers. Hit a couple of pull-up threes, which, he's such a good catch and shoot 3-point shooter that his pull-up threes are more like, they're pretty league average, right? Like mid 30%, I believe, is what he shoots. And catch and shoot threes are typically around 43% for his career. But he was 4 or 5 on threes in this game, and at least 2 of those were pull-up attempts coming off of screens in transition. There was one he curled around a screen and just popped it and made it from the right wing. Like, you don't see that a ton from Mike Conley, but he's playing with high confidence and really is the straw that stirs the drink for the Wolves. He's the perfect fit as a veteran, low usage, but hey, I can score if I need to, and I can give you some defensive effort. And the other thing is, when the Wolves traded for Conley, there was a little bit of hand-wringing, I think, about his decline defensively. Well, guess what? That Utah Jazz team that he was on early last year and the year prior, there weren't a whole lot of perimeter defenders there, right? It was kind of up to Mike Conley to be the guy on the perimeter. He doesn't have to do that anymore. He can be, and he probably is, he is the fourth best overall defender currently in the starting lineup. And that's a luxury because he's still an above average defender and is a savvy player, knows how to get through screens, get around screens, get over screens, and is so intelligent, is so experienced, but he doesn't have to carry the load defensively. You have Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards at the point of attack, and you have Rudy as a failsafe roaming the baseline. Like, this is a well-rounded defensive team, and Mike Conley fits into it perfectly. All right. I want to talk individual studs and duds next. I have to get to Shake Milton, shout him out. That'll be separate from that conversation, but I'll do that next. Also, Naz Reid. Just so many guys played well for the Wolves in this game. So we'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Jace Medical. We spend a lot of time talking together here on the podcast. We get fired up together on wins, as has been the case a lot lately, and also losses, who starts, who sits, what the rotation looks like. And I'm thankful for that connection that we have. Today, though, I want the chat to be a little bit more personal. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, you're covered. Thanks to our partners at Jace Medical, life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply, even ED generics for Cialis, Viagra, and Revatio prescriptions. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. There's a verified customer that had the following to say about Jace. Quote, I am thankful for the service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half to have it. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year's supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily med, go to jacemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Again, that's jacemedical.com. It's there on the screen if you're on YouTube. JASEmedical.com. Use the promo code Locked On. You'll get $20 off your purchase. All right, let's close this thing out with a couple other positives from the game. Let's start with, or I guess continue with, I didn't really talk about the third quarter much yet. The third quarter, again, if you didn't watch the game, you look at the box score and you're like, oh, well, second quarter was the big one, right? Well, obviously that's where the Wolves created their distance and it was the most important quarter. The third quarter was like the Wolves flashed in a way that was like, oh, okay, this is what this team could be. And last year we kind of got used to, well, the Wolves played at a high pace. There was never really this overwhelming athleticism in the way they played. And I think, obviously, and I think this is the point. Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, incredible athletes, right? But this team never really felt like they truly played at the pace that the statistics said they played at, if that makes sense. Like, I know numbers don't lie, that whole thing, but like this team, they played fast, but only fast-ish, right? Only on paper. This was the more high-flying, like, get a steal, get out in transition, rip down a defensive board, get out in transition. And also it helps, by the way, that Rudy's running the floor much better, like, rather than plotting behind the play. To have two centers now that are willing and happy, you have Rudy rim running, you have Cat running to the three-point line. We'll talk more about Cat here in a minute. All really, really good to see. And the Anthony, like the Naz steal around the world, behind the back, pass ahead to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, alley-oop off the glass to Ant. Ant had like 2 or 3 other transition dunks. That was another thing I talked about, by the way, in the pregame show on Wednesday, the preview on the podcast Wednesday, was getting out in transition against the Pelicans. Like, the Wolves should be able to do that. They need to do that. They need to get some easy buckets. They did that. And this team not only can be smothering defensively, they can be fun in transition in the half court. And I don't know that we'll see this team generate as many turnovers as the defense did a couple of years ago with Beverly and Vanderbilt on the team and that kind of high risk, high reward blitzing defense. But don't look now. They're still like 6th in the league in turnover rate. I think 6 is the right. No, they're 9th in the league. Still top 10 in turnover rate defensively. Like, they're still turning opponents over and getting out in transition and scoring. And if this team can really be like that team where they're solid defensively, but they're so overwhelmingly good that they're also going to generate easy buckets for themselves without having to gamble and have this high risk, high reward approach. Look out. I mean, this offense is going to quickly skyrocket. It's already now middle of the pack after being bottom 10 for a while. It's like 16th or 17th in offensive rating. The third quarter was a good example of that. And I know the Wolves were only a +1 for the quarter ultimately, but the close to the third quarter and the way that they turned the Pelicans over, got out in transition was very impressive and exciting to see. I got to talk about Shake. I got to talk about Karl-Anthony Towns. Neither of these guys are gonna hit the studs list. So actually, I take that back. I'm gonna give Cat a stud. I'm going to switch this a bit. Let's talk about Shake first. Then we'll get to studs and duds. Shake Milton has been the most disappointing part of the season to this point. This could have been, probably was, his Timberwolves breakout. He had 10 points on 9 shots, not ultra efficient, and it was just 1 of 5 from outside the arc. But the 3 he hit was it just felt like, a weight was lifted in that moment, and he just played well overall. He played freer in this game. 10 points, 4 rebounds, which is nice in 19 minutes out of him. He had an assist and a couple of steals. He was a positive plus minus. It wasn't an outstanding performance by any stretch, but he played 3 minutes in the first half and didn't see the floor in the second half on Monday. So this is a big step in the right direction, and probably his best, not probably, it was his all-around best performance in a Wolves uniform. So shout out to Shake for a good game, and the Wolves are going to need him, especially with no Jordan McLaughlin for the next several weeks with the knee injury. They're going to need Shake Milton to show up and be a part of this bench unit here over the next several weeks and in the longer term over the course of the season. They need that sixth man type. So hopefully we see a bit more of the same, more of not the same, but what we saw Wednesday from Shake Milton moving forward. All right, let's do studs and duds. Of course, Anthony Edwards, we talked about him earlier, 26 points, 8 assists, 3 rebounds, 3 steals, a couple of blocks in this game as well. Oh, by the way, I didn't even talk about the blocks. Oh my goodness. Both of those blocks on almost consecutive possessions, one of them was like above the square on the backboard. Like he was up there. It just the athleticism and the burst. And like, I don't know. Do I need to say this every podcast? Like what we're watching right now with the athleticism and the ability, and now with understanding the moment of like, hey, I can get this chase down block and start a fast break the other way or end this possession and not put my team in a bad spot by getting out of position. Like that's better than jumping a gap and gambling for a steal, right? Like just get that chase down block, use your athleticism to grab a board. Just a well-rounded Anthony Edwards performance. I think I mentioned earlier, but in addition to the 26 and 8 assists, he had 3 steals and those 2 blocks. Just a phenomenal Ant performance. Karl-Anthony Towns, I'm also going to give him a stud in this game. He had 23 points on 9 of 12 shooting. We saw him kind of go off from outside the arc early in the game, 4 of 5 from outside the arc overall. He only had the 2 free throw attempts, but he's got his 3-point percentage now up over 30%. We know he's a career 39, 40% 3-point shooter. So that's going to continue to move northward. Yes, he fouled out in 28 minutes. He only had 3 boards, no assists in this game. So there were moments that weren't great, especially in the second half. We saw a little bit more of the complaining from Cat on both ends for no calls on one end and getting called for fouls on the other. A couple more silly offensive fouls for hooking. Like every time that happens, I just want to shake Cat and be like, hey, man, the book is out on you. Like opposing teams are probably sending this to the league and sending it to officials before the game or saying to the official right when the game starts or whatever the right protocol for that is. Hey, watch Cat. He's going to hook. And so refs are watching for Cat to hook. Like he does it when it doesn't even matter. Like he did it to Matt Ryan late in the game when it was like a 25-point game. And he was trying to post up in mid-post position against Matt Ryan of all people. And he just hooked him for no reason. Like just don't do that. All that to say, mini rant over. Cat was still good in this game. Very, very good in the first half. And the stud is for nothing else than seeing him lift the lid from beyond the arc. It was just really good for Cat. And Rudy, I mean, what more do you say? I said a lot already about him. 17 and 21, 4 of 5 from the floor, 9 of 12 at the line, making the Pelicans pay for putting him at the line after a rough free throw shooting performance against the Celtics the other night. 17 and 21, 2 blocks and an assist for Rudy Gobert was so good. Also shouting out Nas, a good game. Of course, Cat in a little bit of foul trouble again. 9 for Nas off the bench. Pitches in where he needs to. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, no points in this game. Only 1 shot attempt and he missed it. He had 8 assists and only 2 turnovers in 18 minutes. So Nickeil initiated a bit of offense as well. I don't have any duds in this game. I'm not even going to try to stretch to find one. Jade McDaniels was very good defensively, and he had 10 points, 4 of 7 from the floor, 2 of 5 outside the arc. He did have the 0 rebounds, so if I can just reduce the dud category to a single statistic, it would be Jaden McDaniels having 0 rebounds in 26 minutes, but he was otherwise super good in this game. And by the way, I didn't throw up the stats earlier. I'll do that now on YouTube, but the Wolves were a +8 on the glass again. Yet another team that the Wolves out rebounded. They out 3-pointed another team. Oh, I forgot to mention this earlier too. There's so much to get to in this game. This was the second most 3-pointers the Wolves made in a game this season. The only other game that they made more was the loss to Atlanta when they were playing, they got out to a hot start and then played some catch up at the end. This is only the third time all season the Timberwolves have made more than 15 threes in a game in 7 games. So they're averaging still less than 12 3-point makes per game, which is too low. They are making their threes. They're like 7th in 3-point percentage league-wide as far as the team number goes. But they need to shoot more than 11.7 3-point attempts per game, I think is where they're at now. So there needs to be a bit of movement there. And this was, again, a step in the right direction. Just the second time they've had more than 15 or more 3-pointers made in a game so far this year. All right. That's all I got for you today. There's a lot more to get to Friday. I want to I've been kind of taking a step back on these days in between games and saying, like, what's been so impressive so far? We got to do a little bit more of that Friday, but we'll also look ahead and see who's on the schedule upcoming for the Wolves as they embark on a much, they've been at home for 4 home games, but this will be a long road trip. It starts, of course, with their first play-in tournament. Oh, my goodness. NBA tournaments. The Wolves have been in the play-in tournament the last couple of years, or not 2 years ago, just last year. What is this tournament called? In-season tournament. There we go. The NBA in-season tournament. The Wolves play the Spurs in the in-season tournament on Friday night in San Antonio. It's the first game of a 5-game road trip that includes consecutive games in Golden State, too. They also go to Phoenix, and then we see these same Pelicans here, surely with Zion, in about a week and a half. So lots to look ahead to. We're going to preview it all on the show Friday, get you ready for the road trip. Also, if you missed the live postcast, the audio is the episode before this. If you're listening on whatever your favorite audio platform is, you can listen to the postcast. Last night, it was Luke Inman and Tyler Metcalf of K2Supis on the postcast. Check that out. You can watch it on YouTube at Locked On Sports Minnesota, so be sure to subscribe there. You can listen to the audio here. And then, of course, we'll have this show again Friday, getting you ready for the weekend and for the road trip as well. That's all we have for you today here at Locked On Wolves. A big thank you once again for making the show your first listen every day. Of course, you can find Locked On Wolves free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. If you haven't already, please download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and follow the show on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.